Singapore. The place with those impossibly clean streets and a reputation for even cleaner government. Well, today, we're diving deep into a scandal that's shaken that squeaky clean image. A former minister jailed.
This case has people talking, like, worldwide. Is any system truly incorruptible?
Right.
Seems like a simple question.
So let's get into it. Our, I guess you could say protagonist, or maybe antagonist in this case, is Iswaran.
Okay.
Big name in Singaporean politics. Held those key positions in trade and communications.
Yeah.
And he was actually the one responsible for bringing Formula One's night race to the Lion City.
Yeah, and it's kind of ironic. Those, like, high-octane festivities, the Formula One, seem to be kind of where this all takes a turn.
How so?
Well, Iswaran was convicted of accepting lavish gifts from individuals with direct ties to his work. We're talking, like, green room access at the F1, a private jet to Doha, luxury accommodations, the works.
Okay, so more than just a free coffee and a croissant. This is next level, the kind of stuff most of us wouldn't even, dream of.
Exactly.
But legally speaking, what makes these gifts problematic?
It's all about the context. These weren't just random acts of generosity. The gift givers, people like Tycoon Ong Beng Seng, who held the rights to the F1 race in Singapore, had business interests that directly intersected with Iswaran's ministerial powers.
Okay, so for example?
Iswaran was involved in decisions regarding the renewal of F1 contracts, something very, very important to Ong Beng Seng's business empire, right?
So it's not what you know, it's who you know. But legally, where's the line between a generous gift and straight-up bribery?
See, initially Iswaran faced serious corruption charges, the kind that could land you behind bars for a very long time. He denied those very strongly, but the prosecution later shifted focus, and Iswaran ultimately pleaded guilty to several charges of accepting these lavish gifts and one count of obstruction of justice.
So he admitted to accepting the gifts, but not to any explicit quid pro quo. That feels like a subtle but important distinction.
Absolutely, because proving corruption requires demonstrating a clear exchange. You do this for me, I do that for you. But with gifts, it gets murky. It's more about the perception of a conflict of interest. The possibility that these luxurious tokens, these gifts, were intended to sway Iswaran's judgment in his official capacity.
Which brings us to Singapore's reputation. This isn't just any country. This is a nation built on an image of uncompromising integrity. So how does this scandal land in a place that prides itself on being like a bastion of clean governance?
Imagine a perfectly polished diamond, flawless, gleaming. Now picture a tiny chip, a flaw, suddenly visible.
Okay.
That's what this case represents for Singapore. It sent shockwaves through a nation that consistently ranks among the least corrupt globally.
And it's not just about perception. Singapore has very meticulously constructed a system designed to deter corruption. Like their approach to ministerial salaries, unique, almost radical.
Singapore's philosophy is to pay its ministers extraordinarily well. Starting salaries, upwards of $36,000 a month.
Wow.
The idea being to make any potential bribe seem paltry, insignificant compared to their already substantial wealth.
But now with this case, it makes you wonder, if a system designed to insulate against corruption at its core gets breached, is it a systemic failure or just one bad apple?
That is the question. And everyone's asking it from, the halls of parliament to, everyday Singaporeans. It's shaken the very foundation of their system.
Yeah, it really feels like it's exposed a vulnerability, like a crack in the armor of this, like you said, seemingly impenetrable system.
Right. And it comes at a really interesting time for Singapore. They've got a general election coming up, and the ruling party, they've had this decades-long grip on power, but now they're facing, a new kind of scrutiny.
Yeah, because for so long, the PAP has been synonymous with stability, with prosperity, and, of course, that squeaky clean image. It's like they've enjoyed this almost unshakable authority.
Exactly. And I think the opposition senses an opportunity here.
And the PAP, they're not oblivious to this. I mean, with the election looming, they have to be feeling the pressure.
Absolutely. And their new prime minister, Lawrence Wong, he's walking a tightrope right now.
How so?
Well, on one hand, he's emphasizing that no one is above the law, showcasing Iswaran's conviction as proof that the system works. But at the same time, he needs to distance himself and the party from the scandal, reassure voters this isn't like a sign of some deeper rot within the system.
It's a tough sell. I mean, this isn't the only scandal Singapore has seen recently.
Right.
There have been other high-profile cases,
Right.
ministers, even concerns about the cost of living.
Yeah. Right. It all kind of feeds into this narrative that maybe, just maybe, the Singapore story, that idea of this flawless meritocratic society, maybe it needs a bit of revising.
And that's what the opposition is banking on.
Exactly. They're highlighting that gap.
So are we on the cusp of a, political earthquake here?
It's hard to say. Singaporeans tend to be pretty risk-averse.
Right.
And they still hold a strong majority in parliament. But there's definitely a shift happening. You can feel it. Voters are asking tougher questions, demanding more transparency.
In this Iswaran case, it's become like a litmus test.
Yeah, I think so.
The way people view this case, and of course the outcome of this upcoming election, it'll tell us a lot about the future of Singapore. And speaking of consequences, let's talk about Iswaran's sentence. 12 months. That's a big deal.
Yeah.
Especially for a former minister. Especially in a country that prides itself on, zero tolerance for corruption.
And what's really striking is that the judge actually gave Iswaran a longer sentence than even the prosecution asked for.
Oh, wow.
They wanted 6 to 7 months. He gave him a full year.
So what kind of message does that send?
I think it's pretty clear. If you're in a position of power, you will be held to the highest possible standard.
Yeah. It makes you think about public trust, how easily it can be eroded,
Absolutely.
and how difficult it can be to rebuild.
This case has really highlighted that fine line that Singapore walks, projecting this image of unwavering integrity, but also grappling with the reality that, well, people are fallible, even in a system as meticulously crafted as Singapore's.
And it brings us back to something we touched on earlier, those eye-watering ministerial salaries. Is it possible this strategy, this pay them a king's ransom to keep them honest strategy, is not as foolproof as it seems?
It's a huge debate right now. On one side, you have those who say these high salaries, they're crucial to attract and retain top talent in government. And they point to the fact that Singapore, time and again, ranks among the best governed countries in the world. Proof, in their view, that the system works.
And the other side.
They see these hefty paychecks as a symptom of this increasingly elitist system, one that's out of touch with the average Singaporean.
Who's probably struggling with the rising cost of living and everything else.
Exactly.
And this case has just fueled that debate even more.
It's forced this conversation. Are these astronomical salaries intended to be this, shield against corruption? Are they actually creating a different problem?
Like what?
A sense of entitlement.
Oh, interesting.
A disconnect from the realities that ordinary citizens are facing.
So are we witnessing, a turning point in how we think about preventing corruption? Is this it for the mega salary for public officials?
I think it's a conversation that's gaining momentum, not just in Singapore, globally. This case, like a lot of high-profile scandals, it forces us to really re-examine some long-held assumptions.
Yeah, and maybe even more importantly, to look beyond just the surface. To acknowledge that even the most perfect-seeming systems, they're still vulnerable to just human nature.
And the allure of power and influence, that can be a very, very powerful motivator, even for those who seemingly have it all.
Let's talk about the man at the center of it all.
Right, the tycoon, Ong Beng Seng. Brought Formula One to Singapore, a titan of industry. Now he's facing a different kind of race.
Before we get into the charges against him, can you paint a picture? Who is Ong Beng Seng? What kind of influence are we talking about here?
Imagine, a chessboard, all those intricate pieces. Ong's a grandmaster. He understands that delicate balance, power, and influence. He's not just a wealthy businessman. He's a strategist, a deal maker. Connections everywhere. Boardrooms, political circles, you name it.
And now those connections, they've put him in the spotlight. It's not every day someone of his stature faces charges, especially in Singapore.
No, not at all. And the charges are serious. Now, he hasn't been convicted yet, but the fact that the authorities are pursuing this, it speaks volumes. Nobody's above the law, not even someone as well-connected as Ong Beng Seng.
So let's get into it. What's he being charged with? Is this just about those lavish gifts he gave to Iswaran, or is there something more?
It's still unfolding. But the core issue is the relationship between Ong and Iswaran. Did those gifts, those extravagant gestures, did they come with strings attached? Was there this expectation of something in return? That's what the prosecution is trying to figure out.
Which brings us back to that question of quid pro quo. Did Ong receive, or try to receive, preferential treatment, favorable decisions, access to information, all because of his generosity towards Iswaran?
Exactly. And proving that kind of intent, it's really difficult. You're often relying on circumstantial evidence, trying to build this narrative where favors and influence were flowing in both directions.
Ong's maintaining his innocence.
Oh, absolutely. He denies any wrongdoing, vehemently. But he was arrested, questioned, they even took his passport. So it's serious. This isn't just a slap on the wrist. This is a full-blown investigation, and the consequences could be huge.
Like a real fall from grace. One minute you're the toast of the town, brought Formula One to Singapore. The next you're fighting to clear your name.
It really shows you how fragile power, influence, reputation, all of it, really, how fragile it can be, even in a system like Singapore's, where the rules are clear, the penalties are severe. Human nature finds a way to test the boundaries.
So we're left with more questions than answers.
Mm.
What happens with these charges against Ong Beng Seng? Does this lead to real change in Singapore, or does it fade away?
Time will tell. But one thing's for sure, this whole thing, it's exposed the vulnerabilities, even in the most well-designed systems. We need vigilance, transparency, accountability. Those aren't just buzzwords. They're essential for any society that wants to be fair.
It's a reminder, isn't it, that even in the most seemingly ordered societies, well, the pursuit of power, it can have consequences, unexpected ones, far-reaching ones.
It really makes you think.
It does. And that's what we're here for, to peel back the layers, examine the players, grapple with those big questions: governance, accountability, ambition, integrity. This story's not over yet. But as we wrap up this deep dive, I hope you're left with a better understanding of just how complex the world can be.
Absolutely. And how important it is to keep asking questions, challenge assumptions, never take anything for granted.
Well said. Thank you, as always, for joining us on this journey. Until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep diving deep.